And welcome, folks, to this edition of the HAGMANN Report. It is Tuesday, August 29th, 2017, and I want to thank Bill McIntosh from Akasa Media. Bill McIntosh, Akasa Media, is a class act, and he's done so many great things to bring us the information that this hour is going to be a tremendous hour. If you need a speaker for your event, there's one person I recommend. That's Bill McIntosh, Akasa Media, and I'm going to give you his phone number slowly. It is 305-396-2806. All right, give him a call, and if you have an event that you want to schedule a speaker, he's the man. Our guest coming up is Mr. Hugh Clark. Now, Hugh Clark was an honor guard on the honor guard detail following the JFK assassination. When JFK was assassinated, Hugh Clark was assigned to the honor guard detail. In fact, he's pictured. He's an African-American gentleman pictured carrying or standing guard and also carrying the casket of JFK to this book. I've got a copy of it. It's on my Kindle, and it's a very interesting book. In fact, he writes. There are like 244 different conspiracy theorist groups. Not my term, but that's what someone described them as, about the JFK assassination in existence out there. That's an interesting fact because this is coming at the assassination from a different angle. Hugh Clark has got just an amazing resume. He's got a wonderful story growing up. Of course, he joined the military, and there, of course, he served at that JFK in the honor guard, and then he joined the NYPD, where he worked at Fort Apache, the Bronx, Precinct 41. Or the 41, as they called it. That was on Simpson Street, Southern Boulevard, the Bronx. Bad neighborhood. That's an understatement. Back in the days when it was Fort Apache, the Bronx. He retired after 22 years with a gold shield. He's got an amazing story to tell. And I remember as a young man, not a young man, as a child, basically, watching the assassination with my parents and watching the coverage of the assassination and watching the coverage of the funeral as a young man. So in a way, I almost feel like I'm seeing this man again after 50 plus years. That's kind of how I feel in my heart. But the book Betrayal describes the handling of JFK's body, the caskets and such. Now, you might say, why is this important today? What does this have to do with anything today? Here's kind of what I think. 1963, there was a betrayal of the president. There was a betrayal of the presidency. And there was a betrayal of a nation. Perhaps one might say we are where we are today because of events like this in history. You don't get closer, in my view, to event-changing history than this. And even equally important, the betrayal of an honor guard. Hence the title of his book, Betrayal. I'm very excited to have Hugh Clark on. I'm very not just excited, but I'm after reading his book, and I'm not quite through all of it yet. Knowing what he knows will add context. Will dispel many of the rumors or the notions out there. He was an eyewitness to history. Perhaps not necessarily understanding what he saw when he saw it, but at an event at Westmont, Illinois, some 50 plus years after the assassination, and a meeting with others involved in the incident. Betrayal is the word. Betrayal was what he found out took place on that November weekend, 1963. So I would urge everyone to pay very close attention to this. This gentleman is a very, very nice man. I have utmost respect for Hugh Clark, just from reading his book, and I had the opportunity to briefly chat with him today, and he's just a great guy. So dispel all of the preconceived notions you have about what you've read about the events following the assassination, and let's listen to Hugh Clark. Mr. Clark, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. We can see you. Thank you so very much for joining us tonight.
Okay.
Wow. I'll tell you something. Again, I just, in the opening, I said, kind of like you wrote in your book, I remember watching you on television in 1963 when I was a young boy. And so it's kind of like seeing someone over 50 years later. Hey, it's great to see you again.
Thank you.
But you're the author of Betrayal, and you've got a story to tell about the JFK assassination and such. And I was just telling the audience too, we've had Abe Bolden on, Clint Hill on, interviewed those two gentlemen. But you're coming at this kind of special because you were an honor guard, and you wrote the book Betrayal, a JFK Honor Guard Speaks. And I think that the story you've got to tell about the events, especially after the Westmont meeting, when you found some things out, is just amazing. Your book is amazing. I love it. But before we get into that, can you just tell the audience a little bit about your history? Because you grew up. I love the story in your book about your childhood, your dad, how you went to enlisted immediately before Vietnam, or as Vietnam was taking place. So just kind of let's start out there, and we'll get to the Westmont meeting and beyond.
Well, as in the book, I talk about, growing up in a large family of 11 sisters and brothers. And my dad was a pastor. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And, when you have that many kids in a house, it's a handful. And one of the things that we always prided ourselves on was family first. And growing up, when your dad is a pastor, you try to live by the golden rule, or as my mother used to say, she used to hang the strap by the door. And the saying over the strap was, "I need thee every hour." Meaning that if someone got out of hand, she always knew where the strap was. But it was a very close-knit family. And as we grew up through the years, we were known as the 12th Avenue Gang because there were so many of us.
Okay. So 11 siblings you had. Wow, big family. All right. And you were the youngest, right?
I was the youngest son. I had there were five boys and 6 girls.
Okay.
And as we grew older, 3 of my brothers, my oldest brother went into the Air Force. I had 2 brothers in the Marine Corps, and my sister and I went into the Navy. So between us, we have almost 50 years of military service in the family.
Wow. That's fantastic, and thank you for your service. And I know in your book you write that your father was none too happy about your enlisting, especially given the time period that you enlisted. However, that kind of brought you to the events that you experienced in with the honor guard, and you know, it's just it's amazing how decisions and events shape future, you know, or the course of our future, and that's amazing. So uh, let's, because our audience is just I'm getting emails saying, oh, please tell us about your time in the honor guard, and specifically about the events that you've written about in Betrayal. I'm just going to ask you, what happened? What was your first experience? When did it start? When did your experience with the body of our president, John F. Kennedy, when and how did that start? How did that come about?
Well, on this particular day, November 22nd, we were all up on, it was a Friday, we were all up on the third deck, as we refer to, as though we were aboard ship. So everything that, when you're on shore duty, you refer to everything as if you were aboard ship, being in the Navy. So on this particular day, we were all up on the third deck, and that's where we have the television room where we shine our gear, we press our uniforms. But on this particular day, it was nearing Thanksgiving, and everybody was, you know, hoping to go home for Thanksgiving. And so we were all up on the third deck early in the morning. We were shining our shoes, trying to get squared away because we had every intention of going home for Thanksgiving. And shortly before noon, it came over the television, breaking news: President Kennedy has been shot, and everything stopped. I mean, it just seemed on that day, prior to the breaking news, it was sunshine. You know, the day was sunny, a little chilly, but everything seemed to be okay. But as soon as that breaking news came over, everybody just knew that, you know, nobody was going home for Thanksgiving or anything else, because at that time we didn't know whether or not there had been an assassination attempt by a foreign government, or whether uh, where it was coming from, really. But we all knew at that time that, you know, everything was shut down. Everybody went on high alert, all the bases in the United States and overseas, because we just didn't know. And shortly thereafter, when we got the word that the president had passed away, uh, you know, it was a done deal that nobody was going any place. And again, as I said, it was all the bases in the United States and overseas went on high alert.
Hmm.
And while we were watching the TV, trying to get all the news we could out of Dallas, a call came over the PA system. You know, Hubie report to the guard office, the honor guard office, which was on the second deck. And I went down, and the commanding officer, who was Lieutenant Commander McNulty, because I was the head of all the pallbearers in the Navy Honor Guard, told me to, you know, saddle up, which means, you know, get dressed in your dress blues, put on your brass, you know, make sure you're squared away. Someone would be there to pick me up in about a half an hour. I didn't even ask uh, who was coming or where I was going. I just followed the orders. And the next thing I know, I was down on the quarterdeck. A shore patrol car pulled up. I got in the car, never asked any questions as to where we were going and what I was supposed to do. And as we drove through Washington, going to Andrews Air Force Base, where the president's plane was to arrive, the streets were empty. I mean, there was nobody on the streets. I guess everybody was home, glued to their TV. And as we approached Andrews Air Force Base, I mean, it was an armed camp.
Hmm.
Nobody was coming on and nobody was going off. And as we arrived on the tarmac, as we pulled up, I don't think I've ever seen so many people in my life on a military base. But as we pulled up and I exited the shore patrol car, there were other military personnel, other military honor guards from the different branches of the military, and I was told to report to Lieutenant Byrd, who was in charge of the detail. And when I reported to him, he put me along with five other guys, other service members that were also in the honor guard. And we were instructed that when the president's remains came down from Air Force One on the elevated truck, we were to remove them off the elevated truck and place them in a Navy ambulance. Now, as this was unfolding, there were many military, service members, admirals, generals, and civilian personnel. I assumed that they were FBI, CIA, Secret Service. But as the elevated truck descended down to our level, as we moved on to take off the remains of the president, we were almost, for lack of a better word, we were assaulted by, members in civilian clothes who we didn't know who they were, but they tried. It was almost as though we were wrestling the casket or the remains of the president from them, at which point the casket almost fell and hit the tarmac. Thank God it didn't, but we were interfered with. But we were able to place the president's remains in the ambulance, and at which time the First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and some other dignitaries got into the ambulance, at which time we boarded a Army helicopter and we shadowed the Navy ambulance from Andrews Air Force Base all the way to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where the autopsy was supposed to take place. But as we neared Bethesda Naval Hospital, we kind of speeded up so we would be in place when the motorcade arrived at the administration building where the morgue was located. And as we arrived at Bethesda Naval Hospital, we were picked up in a pickup truck, which brought us around to the administration building on the right side, where the motorcade was to pull up, and we were going to remove the remains of the president and take them into the morgue. But when the motorcade arrived, we were in place. The First Lady exited the ambulance, Bobby exited, and I believe Robert McNamara. And we waited until they went into the administration building before we attempted to remove the remains. And once they were inside, the lieutenant who was in charge, Lieutenant Byrd, gave us the signal to move on the ambulance to remove the remains. And as we proceeded forward toward the ambulance just took off. It just sped away. And we were stunned for a moment, and then the lieutenant ordered us back into the pickup truck, which was parked right behind us, and we jumped in the back of the pickup truck and started chasing the ambulance. And as it was dark at that time, we followed until we lost sight of the ambulance. It was almost as though they were trying to lose us, but at the same time, the driver knew the grounds up at Bethesda Naval Hospital, but we still lost it. And for approximately 15 to 20 minutes, we were going around in circles. We went all the way around to the back of the building where the morgue was located, proceeded back to the front, no ambulance. We went back around. We did this twice. And on the third pass, we pulled up and the ambulance was located in the back of the uh, in the back of the administration building where the morgue was located. At which time we formed up and we proceeded to remove the remains of the president and take them into the morgue. And once we brought the remains into the morgue, right off the hallway, they have what you call the coal locker room, where they store the deceased personnel that has passed away, waiting for either autopsy or for burial. But when we brought the remains of the president in, they stopped us at the coal locker room, and we didn't actually take the bronze casket into the inner morgue. And they never opened the doors while we were standing there. And we were instructed to go back out into the hallway and stand guard. And from the time that we stood guard, no other casket came through that door other than the mahogany casket that was brought in from Guller's funeral home after the autopsy was performed. So we never had an opportunity to actually take the bronze casket into the morgue. Shortly thereafter,
was
while
that?
the autopsy,
I'm sorry. I just want to ask this: was the bronze casket the same casket that went into the ambulance from Air Force One?
yes.
Okay.
And the reason I can say this definitively is because the same casket that we took off the elevator truck, it had a dent on the top, and on the right side of the casket, the handle was broken. And that's the same casket that we took out of the ambulance at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Same casket
Okay.
that we brought into the morgue.
All right. All right, sir. Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead and continue, sir.
Say again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did not mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make that clarification because
Yes,
in your
because
book,
I know that there had been stories that, oh no, a different casket, but it was the same casket that we took off the elevated truck and placed in the morgue, and that we took out of the ambulance at Bethesda Naval Hospital and brought into the coal locker room.
all right,
Now,
sir.
while we were standing guard outside of the morgue, as I said, the only other casket that went into the morgue that night that we observed was the mahogany casket that the president was buried in. Now, while we were standing outside on guard, our responsibility was not to allow any unauthorized personnel to go into the morgue or to have any photographers get close enough to the morgue where they could snap photos. But while we were standing there, our Lieutenant Byrd, came out and he asked us point blank, do any of you guys want to go in and watch the autopsy? And for me, it was a quick no, because I didn't want to see, the commander in chief laying on a table. But unfortunately, because we were on the doors, Admiral Berkeley, who was the president's physician, was going into the morgue, and as we opened the door for him, I had an opportunity to look into the morgue and see the president from the waist up. And at the time, it just appeared to me that he was asleep. It didn't appear that he, had passed on. But one of the things that I noticed in that 10 to 15 seconds was that his head was placed in I didn't know at the time, but I found out later, was called a chalk block. Because once I became a New York City detective and had to go to the morgue to pick up evidence, I walked into the morgue one day and saw the same object that I had observed under the president's head at Bethesda Naval Hospital. And I asked the pathologist, what do they call that? And that's when he informed me that it was a chalk block. But getting back to Bethesda, there were a number of strange events that took place. One, being the Air Force Chief of Staff. His name was General Godfrey McHugh. He had bought the president's blue suit down that he was to be laid to rest in. And when he came out of the morgue, he was very disgruntled and kind of had an attitude as far as what had taken place. And one of the things that, because we were curious as to what was going on in the morgue, and when he came out, we were inquisitive, but his contempt was for Lyndon Johnson having made Jackie, the first lady, come up and witness him getting sworn in on Air Force One, because she wanted to stay with the casket back in the hold, or back in the cargo area where the president was resting, or was lying in the casket.
Right.
So that was some of the things that was going on that we never forgot. But once all that had taken place and they had dressed the body, they had embalmed, because ordinarily they don't embalm in the military. So they had to bring in, private funeral directors where the embalming took place, because the first lady wanted him embalmed. But once all that was done, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning when when they bought the mahogany casket that Lieutenant Byrd had to find a flag to drape over, because anytime you have a military funeral or military remains, it's supposed to have a flag draped over it. And the fact that he was the commander in chief and a Navy veteran, that should have been done on Air Force One before he was even taken off Air Force One. So that kind of upset Lieutenant Byrd. But those are some of the little things that people really don't know about or didn't hear about. But once we got the remains and we placed them back into the Navy ambulance, we all jumped in and took the motorcade from Bethesda Naval Hospital to the White House. And that was about approximately 4:30 in the morning, where we took the remains of the president and brought them into the East Room. Now, while we were there, the first family, the First Lady, Bobby Kennedy, and other dignitaries came into the East Room where we had placed the president, where he was going to lie in state, and she wanted to view the body. And Lieutenant Byrd was going to have us march out, and she said, no, they can stay. So we did an about face, and the casket was open where she could view the body. And once that was done, the casket was resealed, and we turned, back around to face the remains of the president. As they exited the room, we exited the room, and the death watch came in and took over. We had to stay there for a short period of time till the death watch came in. Now, the death watch is just, military men from all branches of service that stand around the casket to ensure that nobody touches or tries to do anything to the remains. So when we left the remains, it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. We were taken down to the lower level of the White House, where because we had been up since 6 o'clock that morning, and we just fell out on the beautiful purple carpet that was on the floor. So we were all laying on the floor waiting to find out how we were going to get back to our respective bases.
All right. Wow. So that was one emotionally charged full day for you. Indeed.
That was like a day and a half.
Absolutely. So just to recap, I find this fascinating because what you said was, you were assigned to accompany the body of the president in the casket in the motorcade from the airport to the hospital, or
Right.
to yeah,
We were in a helicopter.
right.
We were in a helicopter, and to shadow the motorcade from Andrews Air Force Base to Bethesda Naval Hospital. But as we got closer, we sped ahead in the helicopter to make sure that we were in place when the motorcade pulled up. But at no time did the motorcade ever stop. Did it ever slow down before it got to Bethesda Naval Hospital?
Okay, all right. But the where did the tell me again the somewhat of a chase, if you will, losing that ambulance, or that ambulance carrying the ostensibly carrying the body of the president, kind of attempting to lose you, or whatever happened there, you losing sight of that took place at Andrews Air Force Base or Bethesda?
No, that happened at Bethesda Naval
Okay,
Hospital.
all right.
And what was really ironic about it, because we were in the back of the pickup truck. It was cold in November, and we couldn't figure out. We says, well, we're bouncing around back there. It's very dark. None of us had ever been to Bethesda Naval Hospital before, so we were kind of lost. But the driver knew where he was going,
Mm-hmm.
and we, at a point, lost the ambulance because it was almost as though they shut the tail lights out,
Mm.
because we could see the ambulance as long as the tail lights was on. But there came a time when it was almost as though they cut the tail lights off. Now, whether or not that was on purpose, or whether they didn't want anybody other than us to follow them. But we made 2 passes around the hospital grounds. Now, if you ask me how long does that take, I couldn't really tell you. But on the 3rd pass behind the administration building where the morgue is located, that's when we came upon the Navy ambulance. And the person that was standing outside the ambulance was General Goffey McHugh, the Air Force Chief of Staff assigned to the president.
All right. Now, at the time, aside from that, and your fatigue, obviously, and the emotions and such, did you have a feeling that something really weird is going on, or was it, just, well, I mean, stuff happens?
Well, at the time, the only thing that we was really concerned about was whether or not we were going to be interfered with again by, the civilians, and whether or not there would be anything else that was going to take place that we weren't ready for. But initially, we thought that the ambulance took off because there were so many photographers there. And once Jackie and Bobby and McNamara exited the ambulance at Bethesda, it was almost like these photographers came out of nowhere, and I mean started snapping photos, and we thought that's why the ambulance took off.
Okay.
And
right.
So that's why there was a little hesitation on our part to, immediately jump into the back of the pickup truck and chase the ambulance. But once the lieutenant saw that the ambulance was not going around the back, we jumped into the pickup truck and started trying to keep up with the ambulance as not to lose it. But we lost it for about, I'd say, 15, 20 minutes. Some people, and I'm sure that some of your viewers have read, they were chasing it for an hour
Yep.
and a half. No, it was nothing like that.
It
It was 15,
wow.
20 minutes.
And it's wonderful to have a first-person eyewitness account, 22-year decorated homicide, or an NYPD detective, retired Gold Shield, subsequent to all of this, as an eyewitness to this very historic event, very important event, and clarifying all of the junk out there, and all these theories and these ridiculous stuff that's discussed now. All right, so your duties at that time, contemporaneous to the funeral and such, you complete everything. Is there anything else that's noteworthy uh, with respect to, well, before the Westmont meeting? I mean, 50 years
Well,
passed.
there's things that people don't know about. The day before we were to remove the president from the East Room and take him to the Capitol, the Capitol Rotunda, the Lion State, where the viewing was going to take place. That night before, we we got a casket, and we went to the tomb of the unknown soldier at 12 o'clock at night. And the lieutenant got into the casket, and we were going up and down the steps of the tomb of the unknown soldier with the lieutenant in the casket, because we were very concerned about, the width of the steps of the Capitol, and the casket weighed in excess of 1,300 pounds. And initially there were only 6 of us, but once he was transferred from the bronze casket into the mahogany casket, we had to add 2 additional military personnel because the casket was so heavy.
Wow. So you practiced as well, given the fact it's wintertime, and it's cold, and the weight of the casket, the size, the dimensions, and all of that. Wow. I'm not sure I'd want to be that lieutenant, in the box there, but okay. Um, wow.
Well, it was just to add weight and make it more realistic as to what we were going to be
Sure.
confronted with. And the steps at the Capitol are they're narrower than the steps at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And one of the things that we wanted to practice was one man on the step at a time, because with the weight of the casket, if any of us had stepped on the same step, I mean, it would have been a catastrophe.
Yeah, it would not have made for good viewing or good
No,
memories. Yeah,
no,
indeed.
by no means.
All right. So now, okay. So subsequent to this, the funeral, the nation's grieving, the nation's healing, and of course, you went on to become a detective at NYPD and so on. And it's after reading the book. And by the way, our guest is Hugh Clark. His book, Betrayal: A Member of the Kennedy Honor Guard Speaks, which is a fantastic book, and it's very insightful. Now, okay, so you got just judging by what I've read to date, you got a call with you had a meeting. I guess we can go right to the meeting at Westmont, kind of out of the blue, if you will, in a way. Are we to that point? Can we go there and then?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right,
Well, let me just say this there, that prior to that, through the years, I always told the same story in terms of what I believed had taken place or what I had witnessed take place and what I was a part of. I always told the same story, that this is what took place, regardless of what people have written in books, what was shown on TV, the documentaries.
hmm
And I never really paid that much attention because a lot of the stuff that was coming out wasn't true. And so I always dismissed it and really didn't pay that much attention to it. But in 2015, I received a call from Philip Singer, who was a researcher out of Chicago, and he asked me, would I be interested in having a reunion with other members of the casket team? At which time I stated, well, that would be great. I haven't seen these guys in 51 years. I mean, it would be great just to see them again, you know? And up to that point, I had not heard or talked to any of the members of the casket team, because the very next day uh, of the burial, that next morning, I was shipped out overseas. I went over to Europe, not to return to the country again until I got out of the military, as did some of the other members of the casket team. So we never really had an opportunity to say goodbye to each other. And so when I received a call from Phil Singer asking me would I be interested in coming to Chicago to meet with the other members of the casket team, I was all for it.
Okay. So you had a somewhat of a reunion in Chicago, Westmont in 2015. That's only 2 years ago. So I imagine wow. Well, tell us about that. What happened there, and ultimately what you found out, because we have about 17 minutes left of our interview, and I could listen to you all night. But again, the floor is yours. What happened at that meeting, and what you found out, and hence you're writing the book along with William Matson Law, entitled Betrayal. So, what happened?
Well, initially, initially, what happened was, some of the members of the casket team um, showed up, and we were all glad to see each other. It was almost as though it happened yesterday, but we were all hugging and wanting to find out where'd you go and what have you been doing. And unbeknownst to us, there were other members that were involved in the that night at Bethesda Naval Hospital, and those were Jim Jenkins, um, Dennis David, Jim Metzler, and a couple of other guys that were in the morgue that night. And what the researcher did was he had the casket team members tell their story in terms of what part we played that night. And then once we finished, he gave the members of the morgue detail an opportunity to tell their story. And it was at that time that it was like an explosion took place, because they sat there for a minute or so, not saying anything. And then all of a sudden they said, listen, we're not disputing what you're saying about bringing that bronze casket in to the morgue and everything. But a half an hour, 45 minutes before you guys even got here, the president was already on the table. The
Wow.
chief here, who was Dennis David, received a call at 6:30 from somebody who told him, your package will be here. It will be in a black hearse. He took a silver shipping casket out of this black hearse, brought it into the morgue, placed it on the floor. The corpsman opened the casket, took the president's body out that was wrapped in sheets, and placed it on the morgue table. Now, we were still on the helicopter shadowing the motorcade from Andrews Air Force Base. While we were still on the helicopter, before we even arrived at Bethesda Naval Hospital, the president was already on the autopsy table. Now, as soon as we heard that, I mean, you're talking about 70, 75-year-old guys getting up in each other's face, yelling and cursing at each other, calling each other liars, and, you're full of you know what. And this went on for about a good 40 minutes before the researcher stepped in and said, hold it, everybody calm down. Uh, Nobody's lying here. You're both telling the truth. It was as though the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. And for me, having been in law enforcement, I immediately went into interrogation mode. And I started questioning these guys like you wouldn't believe, like they had done something wrong, because what they were saying was unbelievable. Because there's no way that Jackie Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, would have gotten into a Navy ambulance with an empty bronze casket and rode to Bethesda Naval Hospital knowing that the president was not in that casket. So you can see why everybody was so upset by
Right.
what we were hearing after 51 years. And people, for whatever the reason, they're in disbelief
Oh yeah. Oh, I can
because
imagine. Yeah.
because they want to know, well, how did the president's body get from the bronze casket into a silver shipping casket when we know for a fact that at Parkland Hospital, the president was placed in the bronze casket wrapped in sheets.
Wow. Okay.
So whatever took place on Air Force One, either in flight or when it landed.
Amazing. All right. So we're talking in total three different caskets. You've got the silver shipping casket, you've got the bronze, and then the mahogany.
Exactly.
Yeah, very interesting. All right. And at the time, of course, you in the Honor Guard did not know. I mean, you only knew what you saw, but upon comparing notes in the meeting in Chicago, oh, wait, yeah, the perspectives are a little bit different. Um, it's not a matter of wrong information. It's a matter of perspective and people knowing what, or people only seeing what they were perhaps meant to see, so what happened, do you think? I mean, and why? As an
Well,
investigator.
let me just tell you this, and this is directly from the individuals that participated in the autopsy, the individuals that were at the table, and specifically Jim Jenkins, who is a very intelligent individual. He's gone on, he's in the process of writing a book. And one of the things that he felt he found to be very odd is that, and also I feel the same way, is that whenever there is a gunshot, it always leaves trace evidence. It always leaves particles of the projectile. They took 8 sets of X-rays of the president's remains at Bethesda Naval Hospital and couldn't find any bullet fragments. That's number one. Number two, Dennis David, who was the chief of the day at Bethesda Naval Hospital, was told to take an individual up to his office because he had a cryptic clearance. Cryptic clearance is the highest clearance you can get in the government. But he was directed to take this individual up to his office and type out this classified memo. While he was there, the individual, who was in civilian clothes, took out a vial and said, "These are the bullet fragments that were taken from the president's body at the autopsy in the morgue." Now, Dennis David, not being in the morgue, just assumed that those were the fragments that were extracted from the president's body, when in fact, no bullet fragments were found in the president's body during the autopsy. So where did those bullet fragments come from? We know the president was shot, but we did not find, or they did not find, any bullet fragments in the president's body during the autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital after taking 8 sets of X-rays. So clearly, and I know this for a fact, having done homicide investigations, that there's always trace evidence.
Right.
There's particles left by a projectile once it enters the body. The body had been sanitized before it even got to Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Wow. So you
Where this took place,
Yep.
I don't know. I can't tell you.
But here we are, folks. Our guest Hugh Clark just confirmed, based on his knowledge as an investigator, homicide investigator, NYPD, Gold Shield, 22 years, and also in the Honor Guard, being present at the time of the when JFK's body was at the Air Force Base in Bethesda. This is incredible, obviously, but this confirms many suspicions and dispels other rumors. We've got about 3 minutes left, and again, we could talk to you for hours. I could talk to you for days, or listen to you, I should say. But in the 3 minutes that we have left, and I'm going to be promoting your book all over the place because I think it's an important read. But in the closing 3 minutes that we have together, you've got the floor. What should people take away from your message here, and what's going on, and where do you think that, if anywhere, this whole thing is going to go?
Well, you know, in the short period of time that I really delved into this since going to that initial reunion with the rest of the men that were present that night, I also had an opportunity to meet some of the people that were present on the mall down in Dealey Plaza that day. And one of the gentlemen, he was the gentleman that was there with his wife and two little kids. And he told us point blank, he said, there was no doubt in his mind. He was standing right beneath the grassy knoll. He said there was no doubt in his mind that he was watching the president as the motorcade reached him. He said there was no doubt in his mind that that kill shot that hit the president in the temple came over his head, and he was directly beneath the grassy knoll. No doubt.
Wow.
There was no doubt in his mind. The other thing that I want people to really understand is that, and this was straight from an FBI agent who was trying to get this case reopened. He told us, he said, he was also at Rosemont. He told us, he said, if they had allowed that body to be autopsied at Parkland Hospital, where they had one of the best forensic pathologists in the United States to do the autopsy, they would have found out right then that there were multiple shooters.
As we have long suspected, but again, the combination of your eyewitness testimony as an honor guard at the time, obviously being present there at the hospital and at the Air Force Base and Hospital, your experience as a homicide investigator, all of this, folks, leading us to the conclusion, obviously, that we've suspected, I should say, there was multiple shooters, more than one, and of course, it's all documented in Hugh Clark's book, written with William Matson-Law, called Betrayal. A member of the Kennedy Honor Guard speaks, and betrayal indeed, a betrayal of a nation, betrayal of a president, worse than that, I guess, but also a betrayal of you and all of the people around you. This is fascinating. I just want to thank you so much for your gift of time and for introducing us to your book. 30 seconds. Anything more that you want to add in the last 30 to 45 seconds here?
Just to let people, or give them something to think about. If Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter, if there was no conspiracy involved, if nobody else was involved, then why won't they release all the classified data that they've collected?
That's right.
If he was the lone shooter, if there was no conspiracy, if nobody else was involved, the American people have the right to know.
Amen.
And that's what I want. That's what I want them to think about.
Mr.
They have the right to know.
Indeed, we all do, and I think you've got a special standing given your stature, given your experience and what you went through, what you experienced as well on that day. So, indeed, we do. Hugh Clark, thank you so very much, and please come back and visit with us. Again, book Betrayal, a member of the Kennedy Honor Guard speaks. It's been such a pleasure. It really is. I told him before the interview, I'm kind of starstruck because it's like I've seen him on TV, and he's been there for 50 years. Hugh Clark, thank you so very much. God bless you so much.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you. All right. Folks, that was Hugh Clark. I would urge everyone, get a copy of Betrayal, a member of the Kennedy Honor Guard speaks. It's relevant to today. Release the records. And we should have Donald Trump do that. Folks, you're listening to the HAGMANN Report, Global Star Radio Network, BTR. Going to be back. Stay right where you're at.